I woke up after my hip replacement surgery expecting flowers. Instead, I found out my daughter-in-law had signed herself as my guardian and tried to claim my money. My name is Evelyn Carter. I am a 62-year-old widow, and I have lived long enough to know that life has its share of heartbreaks. But nothing prepared me for the day I opened my eyes after hip replacement surgery, weak, fragile, clinging to hope, and discovered my own family had turned against me. I thought I would wake to roses at my bedside, maybe a bouquet from my son Derek, who I had raised on my own after his father passed, maybe a kind smile from Monique, his wife of 5 years. That was supposed to be a day of relief, a day where I'd open my eyes, see roses at my bedside, maybe hear my son's voice telling me I was safe. I had survived the operation. I had fought through the fear of never waking up again, but when my eyes adjusted to the light, there were no flowers, no soft colors, no scent of lilies or roses to comfort me. Instead, there was a stack of papers on the little hospital table, cold, crisp, official. At first, my vision was blurry, but as the letters came into focus, my stomach dropped. At the top, in bold print, were the words, Guardianship Authorization. And at the bottom, where my name should have been, was a signature I didn't recognize as my own. It was Monique's, my daughter-in-law. I blinked, thinking maybe I was still dizzy from the anesthesia, but then I heard her voice, smooth, almost sweet, but with an edge I'll never forget. "Don't worry, Mother Carter. From now on, I'll be making your decisions." Her smile told me everything. She wasn't here to comfort me. She was here to claim me, to control me. And then, my eyes shifted to the man standing just behind her, my son, Derek. I wanted him to laugh, to shake his head, to tell me it was all a misunderstanding. I wanted him to rip those papers apart and remind his wife who I was, his mother, the woman who had raised him, fed him, sacrificed for him. But Derek couldn't meet my eyes. He looked down at the floor, his shoulders slouched, his hands shoved deep into his pockets. He said nothing, not one word. Do you know what it feels like, to look into the face of your own child and see a stranger? That silence, it cut deeper than any surgeon's knife. I tried to swallow, to speak, but my throat was raw from the operation. I could barely lift my hand. All I could do was stare. Monique leaned closer, her voice dripping with satisfaction. "You don't need to worry about bills anymore, or the house, or your accounts. I'll take care of everything." The way she said it, take care, it wasn't kindness, it was conquest. And Derek, my own flesh and blood, just let her. I had always thought betrayal would come with noise, with shouting, with slammed doors and angry words, but in that room it came with silence. His silence. What would you have done if it were you? Lying there, weak, unable to speak, while the person you trusted most stood by and let someone else steal your life. The nurse entered briefly to check my IV, but even she didn't look at me. She looked at Monique, as if Monique were the one in charge, as if I were already gone. I felt tears sting my eyes. I whispered Derek's name, barely more than a breath. But he didn't move, he didn't answer, he didn't even look up. The betrayal wasn't just written on those papers, it was written in his silence. So I closed my eyes and pretended to drift back to sleep. Not because I was tired, but because I didn't want them to see my tears. And in that quiet, as the beeping of the monitors echoed in my ears, I realized something chilling. I was no longer in control of my own life, or at least, that's what they thought. That was the moment I knew my fight had only just begun. If you are new to my channel, don't forget to subscribe. These are not just stories, they are warnings. What happened to me could happen to anyone, and the way I fought back might just show you how to survive betrayal. My eyes lingered on Derek, my son, the boy I had carried in my arms when he was too small to walk, the man I had once believed would protect me when my strength was gone. In that moment I wanted him to stand up, to tear those guardianship papers in half, and to remind his wife who I truly was, but instead, all I saw was his silence. My own son wouldn't even defend me. The words sat heavy in my chest, louder than the beeping of the monitors around me. I spoke them inside my mind, though my lips trembled, as if saying them aloud might shatter me completely. Derek would not meet my eyes. He shifted awkwardly, the way he used to when he lied about breaking a window as a boy. But this was not a broken window. This was my life. When I finally forced out a hoarse whisper, "Derek," he muttered something so faint I almost thought I imagined it. "It's for the best. he said, still staring at the floor, his voice lacking conviction, his body folded in shame. For the best? For whose best? Certainly not mine. I wanted to reach for him, to grab his hand the way I used to when he was scared of the dark, to remind him that I was his mother. But the pain from my hip surgery kept me pinned to the bed, every small movement sending a bolt of fire through my side. I was trapped, not only by my body but by his silence. Monique, of course, seized the moment. She stepped closer to the bed, her perfume sharp and suffocating, her smile never faltering. "Evelyn, you need to focus on resting," she cooed, her tone dripping with false concern. "Don't trouble yourself with finances or legal matters. We'll take care of everything." The way she said we, as if she and Derek were one unit, made my stomach twist. That word wasn't unity. It was erasure. We'll take care of everything. As if I no longer had a place, as if I were a burden they had already cast aside. I turned my head slightly, forcing myself to look again at Derek. "Do you really agree with this?" I wanted to ask, but I already knew the answer. His silence was the answer. Silence can scream louder than words, and his screamed betrayal. In that instant, grief replaced anger. My heart, already fragile from years of carrying the weight of widowhood, cracked in a way I had never known. "Have you ever looked at your own child and realized he was no longer yours?" I whispered in my thoughts. That realization, more than the pain in my hip or the threat of losing my home, nearly broke me. I remembered the nights I had stayed awake sewing his school costumes, the meals I skipped so he would have enough on his plate, the way I worked 2 jobs to put him through college. I thought of how I had clapped until my hands ached at his graduation, pride swelling in my chest as tears streamed down my cheeks. And now, that same boy, my boy, couldn't even look me in the eyes while his wife stripped me of everything. The nurse entered briefly, checking the machines. Adjusting the 4th, she barely acknowledged me, instead glancing toward Monique for approval. That stung just as much. I was still breathing, still alive, yet somehow already invisible. I felt tears prick my eyes hot against my skin. I couldn't let them see me break, not now, not while they stood united against me, so I swallowed the sob threatening to escape and forced myself to breathe slowly, evenly, though my chest felt like it was collapsing. Monique placed a hand on Derek's arm, her nails glinting under the hospital light. "She needs peace," she said smoothly, "and that's what we'll give her. No worries, no stress, just rest, rest." As if I were already gone. I closed my eyes, not to sleep, but to shield myself from the sight of them standing together, united in silence and cruelty. The monitor beeped steadily beside me, each sound reminding me that I was alive, even if they wished I weren't. In the quiet of that hospital room, with pain coursing through my body and betrayal cutting into my heart, I whispered to myself the only truth I could bear to admit: I was alone. Monique's hands were quick, efficient, and unapologetic. She reached for my purse first, slipping it off the chair as though it already belonged to her. My phone followed, vanishing into the oversized bag she carried on her shoulder. Then my jewelry, the gold watch my late husband had given me on our 30th anniversary, my wedding band, the delicate chain I never removed. She placed them inside without a second glance. "For safekeeping," she said, her tone smooth and deliberate. I lay there, unable to rise, unable to protest, my body heavy from the hip surgery. I wanted to shout, to tell her those things weren't just objects, but pieces of my life, memories etched in metal and stone. But my lips were dry, and my voice barely a whisper. She didn't hear me, or perhaps she simply chose not to. When the nurse entered, I thought maybe, just maybe, someone would notice what was happening. But to my horror, the nurse didn't question Monique at all. She nodded politely, adjusting the IV drip, her eyes flicking to my daughter-in-law as though she were the one in charge. "She needs rest," Monique told her, and the nurse agreed without hesitation. My stomach turned as I realized my role had already shifted. I was not the patient anymore. I was the possession. The days blurred together in that white-walled room. Whenever I tried to ask for water, or to see a friend, the nurses hesitated, their eyes always seeking Monique's approval before answering me. "Not today," they would murmur. "She's too weak for visitors." But I wasn't too weak for visitors. I was too inconvenient. I remember reaching for the remote to adjust the bed, only to find it had been unplugged from the wall. "It's better this way," Monique explained, her voice dripping with false care. "You shouldn't be straining yourself." She said the same thing when I asked for my glasses. She said the same thing when I asked about my church friends who had come to see me. Every request was met with that phrase, "It's better this way." Each word stripped me of more than comfort. They stripped me of dignity. Lying there, I felt less like a patient recovering from surgery and more like a prisoner behind invisible bars. The beeping of machines marked time like the clank of chains, each hour dragging into the next. And Monique, she was both jailer and thief, guarding the room and stealing from me piece by piece. Derek came less often. When he did, he stood in the corner, silent, his head bowed. He let Monique speak for him, and in his silence, I felt abandoned. I searched his face for the boy I once knew, but all I saw was a man too weak to lift his eyes to his mother. Sometimes, late at night, I stared at the ceiling tiles and wondered if I was imagining it all. Could it really be possible that my son and his wife wanted me stripped of everything? Could the world turn so cold so quickly? But each morning answered me clearly. My belongings gone, my friends turned away, my voice silenced before I could even speak. And yet, beneath the helplessness, a strange chill lingered in my chest. It wasn't only about the jewelry or the phone. It wasn't just the missing purse or the unplugged remote. Something darker was happening, something hidden, something I couldn't quite name. I tried to piece it together, but exhaustion always pulled me under. The medications left me groggy, my thoughts sluggish, as if even my mind were being controlled. That was when the fear truly set in. Not fear of the surgery, not fear of pain, but fear that I was already disappearing and no one would notice until it was too late. I closed my eyes, clutching the sheets in my fists, the fabric the only thing left that felt like mine. I told myself I had to endure, that I had to watch, to listen, to wait, because somewhere in the shadows of that hospital room, a game was being played, and I was the prize. What I didn't know then was that the betrayal had already started. The days after my surgery blurred together, each one marked by the sterile beeping of hospital machines and the quiet shuffle of nurses' shoes. I clung to the thought that soon, someone familiar would walk through that door. A neighbor, a church friend, anyone whose face would remind me I wasn't forgotten. I lived for that moment, a hand clasped in mine, a kind smile, a prayer whispered at my bedside, but no one came. I asked the nurse one morning, my voice hoarse but steady, "Has anyone asked for me? Anyone come by?" She hesitated before answering, "Yes. But Mrs. Carter, the doctor says you're too weak for visitors right now. Rest is best." Then she quickly adjusted the four and hurried out before I could press further. Too weak for visitors. The words clung to me like a wet blanket. I had survived hip replacement surgery, yes, but I wasn't so weak that I couldn't talk to an old friend for 5 minutes. Why would they turn people away? Later, I overheard 2 nurses whispering near the door. Her friends tried again. Monique told them she wasn't up for company. Their voices were low, but every syllable cut through me. It wasn't the doctor keeping people out, it was Monique. That evening, I asked Monique directly, "Did anyone stop by today?" She barely looked at me, scrolling on her phone as if I were a child interrupting her. "You don't need the stress, Evelyn. They'll come back when you're stronger. Right now you need quiet. Quiet. That's what she called it. But I knew better. It wasn't quiet. It was control. Each day that passed, the silence in that room grew louder. No friends, no visitors, no one to witness what was happening to me. I began to wonder if I was being erased piece by piece. Without outsiders seeing me, Monique's words could become the truth. She's too weak, she's too fragile. She can't decide for herself anymore. At night, I lay awake, staring at the ceiling tiles, my mind racing. I remembered the way my church friends hugged me after service, promising they'd be there if I needed anything. I pictured my neighbor, Mrs. Hill, bringing me casseroles after my husband passed, telling me I wasn't alone. Were they out there now, standing in the hospital lobby, asking to see me? Were they being told lies about me while I lay here, silenced and shut away? What hurt the most wasn't the absence. It was the thought of them being turned away, confused, perhaps even believing Monique's words, believing that I was too frail, too far gone to hold a simple conversation. My identity was slipping through my fingers, and I was powerless to stop it. Monique continued her charade with ease. "Rest, Evelyn," she said one afternoon, her hand resting lightly on my arm, though her eyes were hard. "Your friends will only upset you. You don't need that right now." She smiled sweetly for the nurse who stood nearby, and the nurse nodded as if Monique's words were gospel. I wanted to scream, to rip away the IV lines and demand to see the faces of the people who loved me, but my body betrayed me, still stiff, still aching, still bound by weakness. So I bit down on my anger and swallowed it whole, letting it fester into something colder. Isolation has a way of bending the mind. I started second-guessing myself. Maybe I really was too weak. Maybe I really was too fragile. But deep down, a voice kept whispering that this wasn't care. This was a cage. What would you have done, lying in that bed, cut off from everyone who mattered? Would you have accepted their excuses, or would you, like me, have started to wonder what they were hiding? I closed my eyes that night, listening to the muffled sounds of life beyond the hospital walls. Footsteps, laughter, the faint ding of an elevator. A world I was no longer part of. My chest tightened, not from pain, but from the crushing weight of invisibility. I thought I was truly alone, but what I didn't realize was that someone unexpected would soon slip past their lies. The nights were the hardest. The hospital grew quiet after sunset, the hallway lights dimmed, and the steady rhythm of machines became the only sound. I lay there, staring at the ceiling, trapped between pain and the ache of loneliness. I thought I was entirely alone, until I heard the faintest creak of the door. At first I feared it was another nurse coming to check my vitals, or worse, Monique returning to remind me of my place. But when the shadows slipped inside, I recognized the figure instantly. Natalie, my granddaughter. Her steps were quick, almost frantic, as she crossed the room. She didn't bother with a chair. She came straight to my bedside, dropping to her knees. Her hands were trembling as they wrapped around mine, and before she could say anything more, the tears spilled down her cheeks. "Grandma!" Her voice cracked, raw and desperate. "They're saying you'll never come home." The words struck harder than any scalpel. I could see the terror in her eyes, the way her lip quivered, the way she clung to me as if she were afraid I would vanish right there in front of her. My body ached, but I forced my fingers to tighten around hers, the only strength I could give. I wanted to wipe her tears, to hold her the way I did when she was little and nightmares woke her in the night. But all I could do was whisper through dry lips, "Hush, my darling, don't cry." She buried her face against my arm, her sobs shaking her shoulders. "They keep saying you're too weak, that you won't leave this place. Grandma, I don't believe them, but what if they're right?" My throat burned as I swallowed the rising grief. I would not let her carry that fear alone. I leaned my head closer, my voice barely a thread of sound. "Listen to me, Natalie. I'm not done. I still have fight left in me. Don't you believe their lies?" Her eyes lifted, shimmering in the half-light. "But they act like you're already gone. They act like you don't matter." I shook my head as much as the pain allowed. "I matter to you. And that's enough. As long as you're here, I am not alone." For a moment, silence filled the room. Not heavy like before, but soft. The kind of silence where hope lives quietly, hidden beneath despair. Natalie pressed her forehead against the back of my hand, her tears dampening my skin. And though I was weak, though I could barely lift my arm, I felt stronger in that moment than I had since the day of the surgery. I wanted to protect her, to shield her from the venom of her father and Monique. Instead, she was the one risking everything just to slip into my room. The thought broke me and healed me all at once. I whispered again, my voice steadier this time. "Natalie, I will come home. Do you hear me? I will not let them lock me away." Her sobs softened, her breath steadying as she nodded. "I believe you, Grandma." When she finally left, slipping out as quietly as she had come, I closed my eyes and let the warmth of her visit settle in my chest. She'd reminded me of something vital. I still had someone worth fighting for. But as the door clicked shut, doubt crept back in. My enemies were strong and I was frail. Could love alone be enough to withstand betrayal this deep? Would you have fought back or given up? The nights were long, and pain often kept me from sleeping. Sometimes I closed my eyes anyway, pretending, listening, waiting. It was during one of those nights that I heard her voice. "Monique." She thought I was asleep, but every syllable slipped through the darkness like a knife. Her tone was hushed, sharp, urgent. "Yes, the accounts. No, the signatures are already in place. We just need the transfer. The word sent a shiver down my spine. Accounts, signatures, transfer. I kept my breathing slow, steady, feigning sleep. I dared not move, dared not let her know I was listening. My body lay still under the hospital blanket, but inside, my heart thundered. She wasn't just controlling my care, she was controlling my life. And now, she was reaching for the last thing I had left. She turned her back toward me, pacing the small room with her phone pressed close. Don't worry, she won't contest anything. She's too weak. By the time she knows what's happened, it'll be too late. Her laugh was low, cruel, the kind of laugh that made my stomach twist. I wanted to sit up, to rip the phone from her hands, to scream. But I couldn't. My hip ached, my body still recovering from surgery, and even if I had the strength, what proof did I have? My word against hers would mean nothing, not when Derek stood silently at her side. I swallowed the lump in my throat and kept my eyes closed. In the stillness, her words grew heavier. Yes, all of it. The accounts, the assets, the house. Once the transfer clears, she won't even know. All of it. My breath caught in my chest, but I forced it quiet, shallow, rhythmic, as though sleep still held me. The house, the very walls I had built my life inside, the place where Derek had taken his first steps, where Natalie had played with dolls on the living room carpet. They wanted it gone. They wanted it all. What would you have done, lying there, hearing your future being sold over a phone call you weren't meant to hear? Would you have confronted her, even if no one would believe you? Or would you, like me, have stayed silent, letting the rage smolder until the right moment came? Her voice softened again, a performance for anyone who might walk in. Yes, thank you, she whispered sweetly before hanging up. She tucked her phone away and glanced at me. I didn't move. My breathing remained steady, shallow, convincing. She believed I was asleep. When the door clicked shut behind her, I opened my eyes. The ceiling loomed above me, but all I could see was the shadow of her words. Accounts, signatures, transfer. They echoed in my head, repeating until I felt dizzy. That was the night I understood her plan was bigger than guardianship. She didn't want to take care of me. She wanted to erase me. She wanted to drain my life until nothing remained but the shell of a woman she could discard when she was finished. My hands clenched around the blanket, the fabric twisting between my fingers. For the first time, the fear gave way to fury. I would not let her win. That's when I realized my money was already disappearing. It was morning when a nurse I hadn't seen before entered my room. She moved differently than the others, quiet, careful, her eyes darting toward the hallway before she approached my bed. She slipped a folded note into my hand beneath the blanket, her fingers brushing mine for only a second. I waited until she left before opening it. My hands trembled as I smoothed the paper against my lap. The handwriting was familiar, strong, precise. It was from Cole Matthews, my old lawyer, a man I hadn't spoken to in years but who had always been loyal. Evelyn, the note read, the guardianship papers they filed are suspicious. Signatures don't match. I believe they're forged. Be cautious. I am watching closely. My heart pounded as I read the words over and over. Forged. The very papers Monique had waved in front of me, the very documents Derek had stood behind, might not even be real. Relief flickered in my chest, quickly smothered by helplessness. What good was the truth if I had no voice to defend myself? I folded the note and hid it under my pillow. The walls seemed to close in tighter than before. I wanted to call out to the nurse, to beg her to tell me more, but fear held me still. If Monique discovered what had been passed to me, she would tighten her grip. That afternoon, Monique breezed into the room as if she owned it. She smiled too wide, her words dripping with false sweetness. How are we feeling today? Still weak, I'm sure. Don't worry. Derek and I are handling everything. She adjusted the blanket around my shoulders like a dutiful daughter, but her touch was heavy, suffocating. I stared at her, silent, replaying the words from Cole's note. Forged, false, lies. She thought she had me caged, but cracks were already showing in her walls. Derek came later, standing by the window, avoiding my eyes as usual. Monique answered every question before he could speak, her voice filling the room, her control absolute. My son barely whispered a word. He was no longer mine, he was hers. I stayed quiet, letting them believe I was too weak, too broken to fight. But inside, something stirred. If Cole had seen the truth, then perhaps there was still hope. Perhaps I was not as powerless as they believed. I gripped the edge of my blanket, my jaw tightening as Monique leaned closer, her whisper sharp against my ear. You don't need to think about any of this. Leave the decisions to us. Just rest, rest, always rest. But inside my mind I was wide awake. They had trapped me, but they didn't know I had a secret of my own. Monique entered the room that evening with her usual painted smile. Her heels clicked against the floor, her perfume announcing her before she spoke. She pulled a chair closer to my bed and smoothed her dress, as though she were preparing for a performance. "We've arranged a lovely facility for you," she said brightly. "It has gardens, activities, full-time staff. You won't need the house anymore." Her words pierced deeper than any knife. A facility. Not a home, not my home, my home. The one place the doctors themselves had said would aid my recovery, where I could heal surrounded by familiar walls, by family photographs, by memories that gave me strength. They had advised against sending me to a nursing home, but Monique's voice overpowered even the doctors. Derek stood silently beside her, his hands shoved in his pockets, his eyes fixed on the floor. I waited for him to speak, to defend me, to remind her what the doctors had said. But he said nothing. Not one word. His silence cut as sharply as her cruelty. I felt the sting of betrayal twice over. Once from Monique's brazen attempt to discard me, and once from Derek's cowardice, his refusal to stand between his mother and the woman determined to erase her. I pressed my lips together, swallowing the lump in my throat. I would not give her the satisfaction of seeing me beg. I stared at the ceiling, willing myself to remain still as the fury burned quietly inside me. That was the night I realized. My entire family wanted me gone. It began with little things. My favorite pearl earrings were no longer in the drawer by my bed. Then the watch my husband had given me on our 30th anniversary vanished. At first I thought perhaps the nurses had moved them for safekeeping. But deep down I knew better. Each time Monique visited, she seemed to glitter more than before. A new handbag dangled from her arm, the leather too fine, too expensive for anything Derek's salary could afford. A sparkling bracelet caught the light on her wrist, and when I looked closer, I recognized it. It was mine. She flaunted it all shamelessly, sitting by my bedside and crossing her legs, letting the jewelry glint beneath the fluorescent lights. "Isn't it beautiful?" she asked Derek one afternoon, tilting her wrist for him to admire. He gave a small nod, but he never looked at me. Not once. I turned my eyes away, hiding the fire that threatened to break through. I could not let her see the rage building inside me. Not yet. So I continued to act frail, my movements slow, my voice weak. I let her believe she had won, that she had stripped me of everything. But inside, I was sharper than ever, each theft carved into my memory like a tally. Every missing piece of jewelry, every unexplained shift in my bank accounts, every new treasure Monique paraded before me. I stayed silent, patient, watching. But little did they know, silence was my weapon. She stood at the foot of my bed, tilting her head, her smile sharpened into something cruel. "You can't stop me, Evelyn," she sneered, her voice low but laced with triumph. "You're finished." The words echoed inside me, finished. As though I were nothing more than a chapter she could close, a loose end she could tie off without consequence. I turned my eyes toward Derek, silently begging him to say something, anything, that would prove I was wrong about him. But instead, he set the folders on the bedside table, pulled a pen from his pocket, and began to sign. His signature scratched across the pages, each stroke cutting deeper into me than the last. He didn't look at me. Not once. "Derek," I rasped, my voice barely more than a whisper. His hand froze for only a second before Monique leaned in, pressing her hand to his shoulder. "Go on," she urged softly. "It's the right thing to do." And he did, line after line, page after page. My son, the boy I had raised alone, was signing me away as though I were nothing more than another document to be filed. Tears welled in my eyes, spilling down my cheeks. My body shook as sobs escaped me, raw and pitiful. I let them flow freely, my shoulders trembling under the thin hospital blanket. To Monique, it was victory. She stepped closer, her perfume stinging my nose, her smirk widening as she watched me unravel. "See? Even she knows it's over," she whispered, her words dripping like poison. I covered my face with my hands, my sobs muffled against my palms. To her, I looked broken. To Derek, I looked defeated. To the nurses who passed by the open door, I looked like nothing more than an old woman crumbling beneath the weight of reality. But behind my tears, a different fire burned. My cries were not weakness. They were a mask. I wept not because I had lost, but because it was the role they expected me to play, an act of surrender carefully crafted to keep them blind. They thought they had stripped me of everything, my home, my freedom, my dignity. But what they didn't know was that beneath the surface, I had already laid the pieces of my defense, quietly, patiently, and while they gloated, while Derek signed away his mother for Monique's gain, I counted each tear like a bead on a rosary, a prayer for justice yet to come. Monique leaned so close I could feel her breath against my cheek. "You're done, Evelyn," she whispered again. "There's nothing left for you to fight for." I turned my face toward her, letting one final tear fall, and let my lips tremble as though broken beyond repair. She smiled, satisfied, convinced she had won. But deep inside, I was smiling too, not with joy, not with peace, but with the knowledge she had no idea what waited for her, because what she didn't know was that I had prepared for this day. Long before the surgery, before the hospital smell and the humming machines, I noticed small things that didn't match the love a daughter-in-law should show. Monique lingered too long over my china cabinet, asked too many questions about accounts I had never discussed, smiled too brightly when I mentioned the value of my home. It was the way her eyes changed when she thought I wasn't looking, like a shopper assessing price tags. That was when a quiet bell began to ring in the back of my mind. I didn't accuse her. I didn't warn Derek. I did what women like me have always done when storms gather on the horizon. I prepared. I scheduled a private appointment with Cole Matthews, the same lawyer who helped me after my husband passed. I told him I wanted to keep my legacy in the family, protected, untouchable. He listened the way good men do, without interruption, and slid a folder across the desk. "A living trust," he said. "You remain in control while you're alive. Your chosen beneficiary succeeds you automatically. It's clean, it's quiet." We met twice more, in a small office that smelled of old paper and ink. I brought every deed, every statement, every scrap that mattered. We moved each piece of my life into the trust, like tucking heirlooms into a locked chest. I named one successor, the only person whose love had never wavered, my granddaughter Natalie. She didn't know. No one did. The trust didn't shout, it whispered. And that whisper was enough. At home, the changes were invisible. I cooked my stews, tended my hydrangeas, and smiled at Sunday dinners, while Monique complimented my silver and asked about long-term plans. I answered with the kind of vague kindness that sounds like gratitude. Inside, I felt the steady calm of a woman who has already moved her valuables before the flood. The day I signed the final documents, Cole placed a pen in my hand and watched me carefully. "Are you sure?" he asked. I stared at the line where my name would live and nodded. "I'm sure." The trust became a living thing that afternoon, breathing, binding, beyond casual reach. The house deed followed. Then the savings I had scraped together over decades, then the small life insurance policy I had never spoken about. One by one, they disappeared from greedy hands that hadn't yet reached for them. Months later, when the fall sent a sharp pain through my hip, and the doctor said the word replacement, I felt fear, yes, but not about my life's work. I had already made peace with what would happen if I didn't wake up. Natalie would be safe, my home would be safe, the story of my life would not be rewritten by a stranger with my last name. So when Monique waved those guardianship papers at my bedside, and Derek stood behind her with his silence, I let the tears come. I let them think I was beaten. What they saw as defeat was, in truth, simple arithmetic. They were tallying items I had already moved out of their reach. My accounts, my deed, my future. Their hands were on an empty shelf. I lay there listening to their plans, the talk of transfers and signatures and handling everything, and a slow smile bloomed in the place inside me they could not touch. They thought they'd stolen everything. They had nothing. I kept that smile hidden behind trembling lips and lowered eyes. I kept my breath shallow, my voice frail, my gaze on the ceiling. I let them believe their lies, because their certainty would make the fall harder when the ground finally gave way beneath them. But that wasn't my only secret. The first night Natalie slipped in past visiting hours, her hands were cold with fear. She clutched them together and leaned close, her whisper barely more than breath. "Grandma, I can't stand what they're saying. Tell me what to do." I could feel her pulse beating against my palm, fast and frantic. I turned my head slowly, pain tugging at every movement, and let my words come out like a thread. Listen. The next evening she returned with something small hidden in her sleeve. Not flowers, not a card, a recorder, no bigger than a matchbox, matte black, with a single red dot that glowed only when the world was quiet. She pressed it into my hand for the briefest second, before tucking it beneath the folded corner of my blanket. "I'll set it under the tray," she whispered. "No one will see." That night, the door opened and closed like the tide, nurses, footsteps, silence, then Monique's perfume, a sweet sting in the air, followed by the soft click of her phone case. She spoke in a voice she believed the room would swallow. "The accounts are almost settled. Yes, she's too weak to fight. Signatures? Don't worry, I've got it handled. When the transfer clears, we'll list the house." The recorder didn't blink. It simply captured every word, every sigh, every laugh she didn't think anyone heard. On the third night, Natalie slid in again, her eyes bright with a courage I recognized from my own younger reflection. She checked the device with shaking fingers, then hid it back where it lay. "It's working," she breathed, relief breaking on her face like dawn. I squeezed her hand. "Good girl." The days that followed were a theater of arrogance. Monique took calls beside my bed, pacing between the curtain and the window. "No, she won't contest. I have guardianship. Yes, her son signed. Timeline? Soon." When she grew bolder, she sat and scrolled, speaking low. She lost track of everything years ago. We're doing her a favor. The recorder listened. It never argued. It never warned. It simply kept the truth. Once, she leaned over me and tucked the blanket under my chin, a performance for any wandering eyes. "We just want what's best," she murmured, loud enough for the hallway. Then, softer, the voice she used for confidences and conspiracies. "Don't make this harder than it needs to be." I learned the rhythm of her plotting. Morning updates, afternoon approvals, evening boasts, the words transfer, list, change of address, authorization repeated like a hymn for thieves. When Derek was present, she fed him reassurances he could swallow whole. "This is normal," she'd say. "It's cleaner this way." He'd nod, sign, retreat. The recorder took his size too. On the fifth night, Natalie retrieved the device and held it in her palm as if it were a bird she was afraid might startle. She slipped it into her pocket and bent to kiss my forehead. "I'll keep it safe," she whispered. I felt the brush of her hair against my cheek, the softest vow I had ever received. I stared at the ceiling after she left, and let the room settle around me. No one knew that the quiet blanket held a mouth. No one knew that their whispers had already begun carving their own confession. Her arrogance became the rope she would hang herself with. When Natalie pressed a tiny earbud into my hand, I thought my heart might stop from something that had nothing to do with surgery. "Listen," she said, sealing the door behind her. Her hands trembled, but her voice didn't. She helped me settle the bud in my ear and cued the first clip. The room dissolved. Only voices remained. Monique's first. "Smooth as ever," he signed. "Don't worry about the mother, she can barely sit up." A paper rustled. A pen clicked, then another voice, lower, careful, too familiar to mistake even after a lifetime. "Derek, are you sure this is legal?" A beat, then Monique's reply, bright and false, completely. "She can't manage on her own, we're protecting her assets." Silence. A sigh. The scrape of a chair, and then his signature. The sound of my son giving away the last of me. Clip after clip, the truth arranged itself like broken glass. Derek wasn't just standing by, he was leaning in. He wasn't dragged. He walked. He asked the questions that make cowards feel noble and signed the lines that make thieves feel safe. "It's for the best," he said once, his voice the same empty echo he'd offered me at my bedside. "She won't notice." I felt something inside me give way. Not a bone, not a stitch, but a soft fabric that had wrapped me since his first cry in the delivery room. The old stories, scraped knees kissed in kitchens, lunches packed with notes, letters written to teachers, coats buttoned against winter winds. All those small, good things that make a mother's life feel like a long, warm ribbon. I realized how easily a ribbon can be cut. Another clip. Monique again. "Once the transfer clears, the account ending in 63 is ours. Move the statement addressed to my email." Papers shuffling. Derek's voice, thin. "Should we wait?" Monique's laugh, close to the mic. "For what?" Natalie watched my face. her eyes searching mine for something. Shock, anger, grief. I gave her all three, because all three lived inside me at once. She took my hand and held it so tightly the bones protested. We listened until the battery warning chirped, and then the room fell quiet except for the steady beat of the monitor. I stared at the window and counted the raindrops sliding down the glass. 1, 2, 3. I thought of the trust, the quiet chest locked before any of them reached for it. I thought of Cole's careful pen, of my careful steps, of the way foresight can feel like faith when you have very little else. And still, the knowledge did not soften the hurt. I had been betrayed by women before, friends who gossiped, neighbors who judged, but this was different. This was blood. This was the boy who once pressed his fevered face into my palm and whispered, "Don't leave." And now, on a recording I never asked to hear, he left me for a woman who wore my bracelet to my hospital bed. I took a breath. Another. The pain in my hip pulsed with each inhale, but the pain in my chest made it feel small. That betrayal cut deeper than any scar the surgeons left on me, I said, and my voice did not shake. It surprised me. How steady it sounded, how certain. Natalie's eyes filled again, but she didn't cry. She squeezed my hand and nodded once, a soldier's vow in a granddaughter's face. She slipped the earbud back into her pocket and glanced at the door. "We have what we need," she whispered. I looked at the ceiling and let the words form slowly, each one a step on a bridge I hadn't known I would ever have to cross. "Tell me, could you ever forgive your child for this?" Chapter 14. The courtroom knockout. The courtroom smelled of varnish and old paper, the kind of place where lives are measured in exhibits and signatures. I sat beside Natalie, my cane resting against the bench, my hips still stiff but my back unbowed. Cole Matthews stood in front of us, sleeves crisp, voice steady, a man who knew how to make the truth stand up and speak. Monique arrived in a fitted suit the color of money. Derek followed 2 steps behind, as always, eyes on the floor. When the clerk called my name, something settled inside me, a stillness. Not the stillness of surrender, but of aim. Cole began with the simple facts: my age, my surgery, my recovery plan the doctors wrote recommending I heal at home. He let the room breathe around each sentence before he placed the first document on the evidence table, the trust, drafted months before the operation, executed with all proper formalities. "Mrs. Carter remains settler and trustee," he said, tapping the date. "Her successor is her granddaughter, Natalie Carter, as designated here. Her home was deeded into the trust. Her accounts, likewise retitled. This is not a woman who lost capacity. This is a woman who planned." He paused, then turned to the guardianship packet Monique had filed. "Now compare the signatures." The judge leaned forward. Cole slid enlarged copies beneath the overhead camera. My true signature, firm pressure on the C, a clean loop on the R, glowed on the screen. Beneath it, the guardianship signature, hesitant, uneven, the R malformed, the T crossed too late. Cole didn't accuse. He asked, "Do these look like the same hand?" Silence. A long one. Then the judge is quiet. "They do not." Monique shifted in her seat and crossed one leg, the gold bracelet on her ankle catching the light. Cole did not look at her. He called Natalie. My granddaughter's hands trembled when she was sworn, but her voice did not. She described the nights she visited me, the whispers, the phones, the phrases that repeated like a bad psalm. Then Cole lifted the small black recorder from a plastic bag and set it on the table. The bailiff pressed play. The courtroom filled with Monique's voice. "She's too weak to fight. Soon everything will be mine." The words floated over the wood panels, crisp, undeniable. Then Derek's voice. "Are you sure this is legal?" And Monique's laugh, bright, careless, completely. Another clip. "Once the transfer clears, list the house." Another. "She won't notice." I watched Derek's eyes close as his own words wrapped around him like wire. The judge asked for the guardianship petitioner to speak. Monique rose with a smile she could not control and tried to paint herself as a caretaker misunderstood. Cole waited, hands folded, until she finished, then called the handwriting expert who had reviewed the signatures from my bank records and past legal documents. Calmly, clinically, the expert explained the inconsistencies, the tremor where there should have been none, the slant that betrayed imitation. Cole ended with what could not be forged: my doctor's letter recommending home recovery, my capacity evaluation from a week before surgery, the trust instrument older than the so-called emergency petition. Mrs. Carter never relinquished her rights, he said, and looked back at me. Just once. And I nodded. The judge spoke at last. The guardianship petition was denied with prejudice. Any interim authority was terminated immediately. The signatures in the packet were suspect. An inquiry would be referred. My property, my person, my decisions, restored. The words struck the table like the clean swing of a hammer. Monique's mouth parted, but no sound came. Derek's shoulders folded in on themselves. I felt Natalie's fingers slide into mine and squeeze so hard it hurt, and I welcomed the pain because it was honest. I stood with care, cane steady, and faced the woman who had tried to turn my life into an account balance. They thought I was powerless, but I had been in control all along. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't need to. The room had heard me already, in ink, in dates, in the simple mathematics of what was real and what was not. Cole gathered the exhibits. Natalie dried her cheeks. I took one slow step, then another, and left the courtroom under my own power. The house felt different when I crossed the threshold again, brighter somehow, as if the walls had been holding their breath and finally exhaled. The afternoon light stretched across the floorboards I had polished for years. Family photos watched from the hall. Derek's gap-toothed grin at 7, Natalie's kindergarten painting held like a prize, my late husband in his Sunday suit. I tapped my cane once on the entry rug and whispered, "Home." Natalie followed me inside, carrying a paper bag like it was fragile glass. She set it on the coffee table, peeled back the tissue, and lifted out the old cedar jewelry box that once sat on my dresser. "I kept it safe," she said, pressing it into my hands. The hinges creaked the way they always had. Inside, the compartments waited, velvet-worn, corners softened by time. Nestled in the center lay the pendant I hadn't worn since the hospital, a small gold teardrop, the back engraved with my initials and the year my husband gave it to me. I called Natalie closer and fastened the chain around her neck. The pendant settled against her collarbone like it had been made for that place. "It was mine," I said, my fingers steady at the clasp, "but it was always meant for you." She stared down at it, then at me, the light wobbling in her eyes. "Grandma," she whispered, and folded herself into my arms with a care that told me she understood more than I had said. We sat for a long time in the quiet. Tea steamed between us. The clock in the dining room kept time with a patient tick. When the doorbell rang, we both looked up. Through the sidelight, I saw Monique's shape on the porch, rigid, chin high. Derek hovered a step behind, his face drawn, the crispness gone from his suit as though the fabric itself had given up. I opened the door only as far as politeness required. Monique's smile was gone, the gloss had cracked. "We should talk," she said, each word careful, as if stepping through glass. Behind her, a neighbor paused at the end of the walkway to adjust a leash, eyes flicking toward us and away again. News travels. It always does. "There's nothing to discuss," I answered. Her gaze dropped to the pendant at Natalie's throat and flashed, quick and ugly, before she mastered it. Derek tried for softness. "Mom." "We made mistakes," the word floated, thin, not brave enough to carry weight. He took a breath. "Can we come in?" "No," I said, "you cannot." The screen door hummed between us. Monique's mouth tightened, not used to being on the wrong side of a threshold. She glanced past my shoulder at the photographs the court could not touch. Weddings, birthdays, a life built without signatures. "We'll see you," she said finally, but it didn't sound like a promise. It sounded like a hope she knew was already leaving her. They turned and walked to the car, under a street lined with people who no longer waved. Later, Mrs. Hill from next door brought a casserole and a hug that didn't need words. Wordless kindness fills rooms faster than any boast. We ate at the kitchen table with the window open, and the house remembered laughter. When dusk settled, Natalie washed the teacups while I dried, our movements fitting into each other's rhythms the way they used to when she was small, and stood on a stool to reach the sink. I thought the day would end there, with quiet, with relief, with the soft ache that follows victory. But as I placed the last cup on the shelf, a detail tugged at me, the way Monique had kept her left hand buried in her coat pocket during the entire conversation. Fingers moving, tapping, counting. No, clicking. A familiar tiny click. The same cadence I'd heard nights in the hospital, when she tucked her phone close and whispered. I set the towel down. Natalie looked over her shoulder. "What is it?" "Nothing," I said, but I listened to the silence the way one listens to a seashell for the ocean inside it. Somewhere, beyond our street, beyond our newly restored peace, gears were turning. The recorder had given us one truth. It had also brushed the edge of another, a second voice that never spoke on tape, a name never said aloud, a shadow that stood just out of frame while Monique did the talking. I walked to the front window and watched the dark settle on the hedges. The pendant glowed softly at Natalie's throat, the trust papers rested in the safe, and my house breathed like a living thing. I smiled, not the smile of a woman who forgets, but of a woman who remembers everything. But what no one knew was that Monique hadn't acted alone. The night held its answer and did not give it,